How's it going? Welcome back to the Manufacturing Come Up. Today, we have a special guest. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey Malachi, this is I'm Mike Ungar. I'm currently a focal point business coach and executive coach, and we focus on helping business owners and business leaders improve their profitability and achieve their personal and professional goals. I've been doing this now for about 2.5 years. Prior to pursuing this profession, I worked for Michelin North America for 35 years. During my time at Michelin, most of my time was spent in manufacturing. My background is in continuous improvement. I've led operational teams, a little bit of finance, managed some capital investments, and later in my career, I spent a good bit of time in HR and human resources in both recruiting and competency management. So, and then prior to that, I was in the Army for a few years as well. So,
nice. And tell everybody about you guys as a group, Industry 4.0.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So when I became a coach, I got heavily involved in the Industry 4.0 Club. So I'm a co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club, and I work with a group of volunteers, and our focus is on advancing the deployment of Industry 4.0. Unfortunately today there are many mid-sized and small manufacturers who haven't gotten started, and quite honestly, we think that's a shame. There's a lot of opportunity out there. Certainly, you don't want to do technology for technology's sake, but when you've got challenges and problems to solve, the cost of technology has come down dramatically, and there's some wonderful opportunities out there to use these tools to help you advance and become more competitive. So our group, our club, we host conversations around Industry 4.0. We provide education on the topic and bring together really a diverse group of people to share and connect to advance the deployment of Industry 4.0.
Where can people find that channel at?
So we're active on LinkedIn. Probably the best place. You can go to the Industry 4.0 Club. We also have a website at www.industry40club.com, and you can find us on YouTube as well and Twitter.
Gotcha. Yeah, I noticed there's like one thing with like podcasts and like different shows like ours. Sometimes it can be difficult to like search and find whenever you're actually trying to search it up.
Yeah. No, I would say the easiest way to find it would be to look at our LinkedIn page, and they're probably also fairly well organized on YouTube as well if you look for Industry 4.0 Club.
Yeah, I always find YouTube is the easiest place to search things.
Yeah. Me too. I've seen that as well.
Awesome. Mike, let's go ahead and take a dive back into your career, and I want to know how you got started into manufacturing. But before we go there, what drove you into going to the military first?
So it's a great question, and it's funny. You may laugh about this. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in high school, and I went to the guidance counselor when I was early in my junior year in high school, and said I'm not sure what I want to do. And the counselor suggested I take an interest survey that compared your likes and dislikes to those of different professions. So I did the interest survey, and the number one, the thing that matched closely with my interests and likes were that of a military officer, an Army officer, as a fact. So my likes and dislikes matched best with that profession, and so that got me interested in the military. And at that time, I applied to the military academy at West Point and was accepted. And so, one thing led to another. And the next thing I knew, I was in the Army. So
Nice. And how long did you end up spending in the Army?
When we graduated from West Point, we're supposed to spend 5 years. I spent just about 5 years as an officer in the military. Like a lot of things, I learned that probably it wasn't going to be where my strengths lie. Unfortunately, West Point's a great training ground. You learn a lot about leadership and about yourself. And one thing I learned about myself in the military was that I don't do well without sleep. So it was a tremendous experience, something I would recommend for anybody, honestly. Our profession the military profession's wonderful. And it's a great way to grow and learn if it's something you're interested in. So 5 years I spent most of my time in Germany. It's quite interesting. I was there in Germany before the Berlin Wall came down. And so the current war in Ukraine is really a deja vu a little bit about, hey, we've been here before. And it's a little scary, but, we know what to do and we know how to help there in Europe if it's needed. So.
Gotcha. Do you feel like any of those skills that they translated into your career?
Absolutely. As an officer, one of the things about the Army and really the military in general that's really a positive or a real strength is that there's a lot of standards, right? A lot of standards of performance, and learning how to achieve those standards and maintain those standards is really key for success in the military. And that's the same thing you find in manufacturing. In fact, respect for standards is one of the real important cultural things that really any manufacturer should be pursuing in order to have really, I call an excellent operation.
Yeah.
And so learning about that, learning the importance of that in the military translated quite well into a career in manufacturing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree. The standards is huge. It's kind of mind blowing. Like some companies, you go into their facility and you look at a piece of equipment and they don't have electrical drawings. They don't have, comments in their PLC code. And it's like, how do you guys survive and keep your machinery alive?
Yeah. Yeah. And, ultimately the standards help you, if you don't have a standard, the other thing we learned in continuous improvement, and it's a basic, but you can't improve chaos. So unless you have a standard, you can't even improve that standard, right? And improve the operation. So it's really a fundamental one to have the standard, and two, then create a culture that people respect the standard. And it's a challenge in our society alone here in the U.S. in particular, in Canada. We tend to kind of like, hey, you're not going to tell me what to do, sort of perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so culturally, it can be challenging, but I think to go with that, and this is something that maybe the Army didn't do as well all the time, but a good leaders did, is you got to provide the why. Why is this standard important? And because if an individual has to be able to internalize that standard, right? They've got to be able to understand. You're asking me to do it a certain way. Well, why? What's the benefit? And that's especially true. When I worked at Michelin, we ran 24/7, and and we had limited supervision on the back shifts. And so, how do I feel confident that the individual is going to follow the standard at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning? It's because they understand the why, they've internalized the standard, and they're willing to follow it. They're willing to be disciplined enough to follow that standard because it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the standard has to be a cultural thing within the business.
Absolutely.
That's one thing. Like right now we're like growing as a company and becoming more of a corporation. And there's sometimes people come to me and ask me a question, and I basically say, go look at the procedure. How are we supposed to do this? And I kind of hate answering it in that way. And it's but it's like it kind of forces people to keep going back to those procedures and to follow what the actual process is every single time.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. It's funny you say that. Early in my career, I had a manager, a plant manager, and I would walk in and ask him questions, right? And one day he said, "Mike, stop. Okay, let me make it clear. I ask the questions, you give the answers." And what he really was saying to me with that response was, my role as the plant manager is to develop the team and to develop in you the competence to deal with the challenges you face.
Mm-hmm.
And so you shouldn't be asking me for the answers. I should be asking you so that you can develop those skills, develop those responses for yourself. And that's really how you develop an empowered workforce. If you're, as the manager, always answering the question, you're not going to get an empowered workforce.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll start to create the opposite culture of what you want. Of now, people will just keep asking you more and more and more, and relying on you.
Well, yeah, and they don't act until they get an answer from you. When in fact, what you want them to do is to manage their own environment and act where the answers are evident.
Yeah, they're constantly being proactive and digging for a solution. Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you transition from the military into a manufacturing position, was it immediately from military to manufacturing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I took a few weeks off in between. I exited the military. I was actually serving in Germany at the time, and rather than try to find a job from Europe, I came home and spent a few weeks doing my job search here in the U.S. And I looked at a couple different alternatives. But what really attracted me to the manufacturing were a couple things. So if you compare again, we talked about standards earlier, but I really enjoyed working in a team environment. Okay. In the military, it's always about the team. And the same thing in manufacturing, it's about the team.
Hmm.
And so I really enjoyed and sought and a place where I could be part of a team. I enjoyed working in team environment. The other thing I looked for when I was looking for that first opportunity was, are the values of the company, do they align with my values? Again, the military taught me about certain values, certain things that I thought they held close for myself. And I wanted to find an organization that had similar um, ethics and morals and values. One of the things from going from West Point, we believe very strongly in the honor code, for example. And it may sound a little cliche, but a cadet will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate those who do. So this idea of being very forthright about those things, I wanted an organization. I wanted to work in an organization that had strong values and strong ethics. And so those were some of the things I was looking for when I left the military, and I found those at Michelin. And so that's why I joined them in a manu- and in I didn't know that manufacturing is what I wanted to do, but as I looked for those elements in a job I might have, I found them in manufacturing.
Mm, nice. Yeah, I like the fact that you pointed out, searching for morals and values in the company that you're going to go work for. I think especially today, the generation coming into the workforce, they are more focused on cultural work environment more
Yeah,
than ever. And I think
yeah,
you're going to see a
absolutely.
lot of success. I think you're going to see a lot of successes and a lot of failures in business due to culture.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because today now as a business coach, I'm one of the things I'm usually talking to leaders about early in our conversation is what is your purpose? What's your why? Why are
Mm,
you in business? And it has to be something more than to make money.
yeah,
People know businesses make money, right? But
yeah,
why are you in business? What is the why? And I think that's an important thing. And then of course it starts with between the why and then have you been explicit about your corporate values? It can't be just intuitive. It's got to be explicit. And then because if it's not explicit, then people don't know how to connect to them. So you're exactly right. Those are things that usually when I'm doing business coaching, I'm talking about very early in my conversations with business leaders.
absolutely. Absolutely. So going back to your entry into the workforce, was there any particular thing that made it so that you landed the position with Michelin, or was it a fairly easy interviewing process?
Yeah, it was fun. We Michelin at the time. So I'm gonna date myself. We're talking
Mhm.
1984 now. All right. So some of the laws of the country have changed. So we couldn't do exactly what we did today than we did then. Uh, some of the some of the tests that were given, but there were a couple things that we had to do. One of the things I remember very clearly in the interview process is we had to build a cabin. Build a
Cool.
cabin, you may wonder. So it was part of our interview process.
Yeah.
But what it was that there were a couple of folks that worked for the company. We went to an area, and there was literally um, a, the long long poles and stakes and things, and you had to build a cabin. You had to
Mm,
build a cabin with the help of a couple of people, and you were given some instructions. And what it allowed the interview to do was to see how you work with others.
mm.
Did you do it yourself? Did you engage others? Were you
Yeah.
kind?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was something we had to do. And, it wasn't as much about did you were you actually be able actually to build it, although that was interesting. It was
Yeah.
how did you work with the people? And
Hmm.
that was what you were being judged on. So that was an interesting part of the interview process.
Gotcha.
Um, we also had some technical things that we did as well. I mean, I had to be able to demonstrate that I could understand like 3D. drawings, and even though I wasn't going into a mechanical engineering role, I was going to an industrial engineering role. You still had to have some understanding of what equipment looked like and how some perspective on things.
Yeah.
And then, of course, ultimately there was an interview and a lot of the typical interview questions.
Gotcha. Yeah, that like team building experience or part of that interview is, I could definitely see where that could be super powerful. I'm just imagining like groups of individuals where, one person steps up and is kind of like the leader of the group. You have, maybe another group of people that's kind of just can't work together. I could just see like a whole ecosystem of different teams like working through this problem.
Yeah. Plus, we assume that everybody's able to, everybody's kind. So the workers were sort of they were coached to not to have too much initiative.
Really? Okay.
And so the idea would be that how did you respond if they weren't doing it right? Did you get mad at them, or were you kind? Did you show them how to do it? Did you demonstrate?
Yeah.
In other words, how you dealt with people was very clear. Came out very clearly in that exercise.
Yeah. So with that process, were they really looking for the kindness aspect of it?
Well, yeah. How you were able to communicate and give instruction, and did you observe?
Yeah.
Observation's a key part of success in the manufacturing area.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to see what people were doing? Did you take time to observe and then help? Yeah. So a lot of different factors go into that.
Yeah, I could see where a company could like take a test. It could be completely different, but like that similar type of idea, and depending on what you want for your own company culture, like really be looking for that metric. Like if your culture is kindness, or maybe your culture is execution, like maybe
Yeah. Now we can't do that today. Unfortunately, we can't do that particular exercise anymore because we did not. You have to make sure that any test or exercise you give doesn't have any inherent bias, and so we didn't go through that process today over the decades of taking it and getting it validated. And it was also rather difficult to do. It required extra manpower and that kind of thing. So we've kind of moved past that and used other ways to ask those kind of questions. But
got you.
Back that was what we did then. So
what part of that is like kind of the bias and the non-ethical part of that?
Well, it really wasn't that it wasn't ethical. It's just that in order to pass the U.S. laws today, there's a significant amount of extra work to be done to validate a test. Okay. And that's it just wasn't and the second part of it was fairly manpower intensive to do the interviews. We're doing a lot of interviews. And so we've kind of evolved past it is more so what I'm saying. It wasn't that it was a problem per se, but it really looked at different ways to do that now.
Okay. Yeah. And I was kind of also just mainly digging into that to kind of make it open up that, the angle of, somebody's looking to apply for a job. Some of these higher level positions, engineering positions, they're going to have rigorous testing, right? You go to work for a Toyota, you're going to go through days of testing.
Yeah, I think today I would say, so one of my roles I had at Michelin over my career was I was a director of corporate recruiting. And so I think today what we really try to do is use behavioral-based questions. And, we ask for folks, give me an example when you work with a team. And how did that go? And what did you do when you ran into a problem? And so we get into the details there, listen for the answer, ask more detailed questions, and continue to dig and really validate through the answers that the individual has demonstrated those skills. Recruiting processes aren't perfect. Okay. So, I think we've done historically a pretty good job, but, it's not perfect. Some people we find, just we weren't able to see something. But for the most part, we're trying to discover whether or not they will work well with the team and how they'll function in our environment.
Got you. And are you kind of speaking like specifically with Michelin?
Well, with any company, to be honest with you, the behavioral-based questions is really the best way to go. Honestly, if you've got a very professional recruiting team, they're going to ask you behavioral-based questions to really understand your experiences and your competence in dealing with certain situations.
Yeah, I guess the thing that's kind of in my mind would be like maybe some manufacturers, like on the smaller scale of things, they may not have like that professional HR team where um, maybe their interviewing process is not as tight. Maybe they're asking the behavioral questions, right? But maybe they don't know how to analyze them in the proper way as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that in today's world, though, you go back to you said today's younger generation. If you're not professional in your hiring process, you probably aren't going to be able to hire.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
folks, because you're an interviewee, excuse me, you can see through some of that. And if
Yeah.
it's not very professional, I do a little bit of coaching on that today for young folks. And what I used to say to them is, look, if you don't feel like this is a professional interview, probably tells you something about the company.
Mm.
And so, it's important that you look at the interview process as you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So if you see an issue or it doesn't feel right to you, it's probably not right.
Yeah.
And even though you may think, even if you get a job offer, one of the things I tell folks, there's one thing worse than not having a job. It's having the wrong job.
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't feel right, you probably
Mm.
should say no.
Yeah. I like like you said, like if it doesn't feel right, because if you end up in somebody that does have like an interview process that's set up in that way, they're probably not valuing their employees very much. They're kind of more of a come in the door, go out the door type of company where every other week it's some new employee. I mean, this is probably more for like production level, where you see some companies where they're just
Well, even
not focused
even
on keeping people.
even production level, one of the things that at Michelin I'm really proud of that we used to talk about a lot was everybody we interviewed has the potential to buy our tires. And this may be the only interaction they have with our company.
Mm.
And so we need to assume that they're our customer. And how we treat them, they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. And so we need to treat them with respect. We need to handle that very well, because they will, even if they decide not to work for us or it's not a good fit, they will tell their friends and family about their experience.
Yeah.
And so you have to have that sort of perspective when you're interviewing, that this is no different than if you're trying to sell someone your product.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's super valuable. I mean, I think a lot of times people don't put weight on the fact that like in that interview process, you're selling your company into the future, not just this one particular interview.
Absolutely. And it is true. I mean, even today, you'll talk to folks that didn't get hired or left Michelin. They'll, if we've done a good job, they'll speak very highly of the company, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
Not one of the most difficult things when I was in recruiting was saying no to somebody. And a no isn't mean that the person is not talented, valuable, maybe even excellent. A no means that they're not a good fit for the role. And it doesn't, and that's the biggest disservice you could tell somebody is yes when it really should be no.
Yeah.
Again, because then you have the wrong job.
Mm-hmm.
So, no is not a bad thing. No is sometimes the right answer, because it tells you to go look for something that's a better match for your skills and your talents, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for me, like becoming a business owner, hiring was a part of the process that I was never really involved in, and so I was generally the guy that got the new hires and then had to deal with whatever I was given. And so it's been a huge learning curve, like the hiring process. Um, hiring for skills versus hiring for culture. Like that's our message today now is like, I don't want to hire anybody unless we absolutely need them right now, unless it's culture first.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a great point.
with us, I mean, especially, I think for any company, it's important, but for us, we have like very ambitious goals. We have, uh, very ambitious, like growth strategies and what we want to do as an impact to the world. And the only way that can really happen is by our culture all being the same, us all being in sync together. you can have a very successful business and not have the same type of culture that we anticipate having, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's definitely a big thing that I've found. And like, even too, like within like the first year or two, I also lost sight of culture myself, right? I kind of like, lost sight of the vision of why we're operating a company and, um, what we're really striving for, right? And definitely this past year, I've been like back on my culture, back on like our goals and us striving towards them, and making sure they're publicly announced to the employees of the team,
Yes.
so
Yes.
that way we all have that.
Well, you asked me about the military and you asked me about the parallels with manufacturing. This idea of culture, the leaders have to set the culture and then they have to maintain the culture. Okay. And they have to insist upon it being maintained within the unit or within the plant or the company.
Mm,
And you're right. It's a very strong leadership role. Um, and sometimes we get so focused on some of the day-to-day things because it's really not a day-to-day thing. It's a long-term thing. It's sort of like every day you come to work and you have to say, what am I doing today to sustain my culture, or
yeah,
to improve upon it. Okay.
yeah,
And that's a leader's role. And it's hard when you have this customer issue and that customer issue to keep that in the forefront of your mind,
hmm,
but it's an important element for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, like especially depending on the size of your company, we're still somewhat smaller company. Um, but it can become easy to be distracted. Like I think of the CEO of the company as like one of their primary jobs is culture, but then also like we have the execution of work that needs to be done.
Hmm.
And whereas we have a COO of the company, and he does a fantastic job. There's still times where I'm needed to be involved in that process, right? And and
Right.
and whenever you land 3 purchase orders in a week, now you gotta start aiming hard at the execution side of things, and you can easily lose sight of your cultural side of things and other
Yes,
aspects.
absolutely.
All right, let's go ahead and dive back in a little bit deeper to kind of how your career started to change as you was in Michelin.
That's a great question. One of the things that, I'm going to, there's a really good book called, by Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Mm,
And, I started as an industrial engineer, and that's an individual contributor role. And I'd managed people in the military. And so I had the opportunity then to become an industrial engineering manager, 3 years into my career with Michelin. And what you realize very quickly is what you'd used to do as an individual contributor, it changes dramatically and you become a manager. And so the skills that you had, I used to, as an industrial engineer, I executed projects and maintained standards on the shop floor and, worked really closely with the operators. And then as a manager, now my role was to help others learn, do that well and to
mhm,
coach them on that. And occasionally, like you alluded to just in your own business, occasionally you get in, you can't be aloof. You got to be willing to get your hands dirty and be in there working as well. But your primary role is now developing others to do that work. And
mhm,
so over my career, um, I advanced from doing that work myself, obviously, then into managerial roles. From the industrial engineering manager, where I had, um, a dozen industrial engineers working for me, I then had the opportunity to move into a production role, production management. And in that case, then I was leading individuals who actually had people working for them. So going from having the individual contributors work for you to having now managers of people work for you is again another different sort of approach that you got to be able to do because now
yeah,
you're coaching them on how to deal with people.
mm,
And so that evolution is interesting, and it requires different skills at each level of the organization.
mm, yeah, yeah. I think they're 100% completely different skill sets. One thing that I noticed is that through my career, I kind of organically became a manager. I was the PLC programmer, And then, at one point in time, I was a PLC programmer, the robot programmer, and all these other job titles. And then, okay, we hired somebody who was, the robot programmer. We hired somebody who was the, electrical engineer. And as those people got hired into the company, they kind of ended up being my junior, right? They were I guided them on whatever was needed in the project. And, so my entire career, because I spent 10 years, I spent, I think 8 years at that one company, right? And this episode of the Manufacturing Come Up is sponsored by Elite Automation.
Elite Automation is focusing on AMR technologies. AMRs are autonomous mobile robots used in your facility to transfer goods or products from one side of your facility to the other.
This is a super powerful tool, and it's a new piece of technology that us as systems integrators can utilize as a tool to leverage your company to be more advanced than the next company and be able to automate systems that at one point were not able to be automated.
If you have any AMR needs, you can reach us at rfq@eliteautomationusa.com.
So I didn't have a bunch of experiences outside of that, and as people were getting hired into that company, and as they were becoming juniors to me, I basically had to, learn these management roles, but they were easy to learn at that point in time because it was just kind of, okay, we got another new guy, right? Just train him up to do his job, make sure that the project gets executed on time. And all that was very organic. But then when it came to like starting a company, I'm hiring engineers that have 10 years of experience. They're not necessarily a junior anymore. Some of these guys are way than I am on the control side of things, or just really all different types of things, right? And so now I'm like managing individuals that are having much higher skill sets, and it's also different too because it wasn't like we just hired one guy who is now underneath me in management, but we're hiring 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and now I have to deal with the way I go about managing each one of these individuals.
Well, what you remind me of when you talk about that and the evolution, when I was early in one's career as a manager, I remember thinking, okay, the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would like done to you, right? So that creates a level of respect and thinking about how you want things done. But really in today's world, when I talk to business leaders, I talked about the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is do unto others as they want done to them. And when you talk about your example of now you've got 4 or 5 engineers and you got to treat them as individuals, what it says is what's important to one of them might not be important to the other. And of course, this is really the challenge we have today. Well, we've always had this challenge in any organization. Is that people expect internal equity. Like, hey, why, I want to be treated the same as Joe. If Joe gets this, why can't I? But they also want to be recognized as an individual, right? Hey, I've got this particular need, and it's unique to me. And, do you acknowledge that? And can you help me have that, achieve that? And so you've got really both those things that play with each other that you have to manage as a leader in the environment. It's not so easy sometimes to do that.
Yeah.
But if you don't keep in mind the platinum rule, people will leave because if they don't feel like they're being addressed as an individual, especially in an employee market, which is what we're still experiencing.
Yeah.
Hey, they'll go find a place that will recognize and take care of them individually as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you have? What is one of your strategies to extract like individual needs?
It's pretty simple. Ask them.
Right.
It sounds crazy,
yeah.
But sometimes you got to be ready for what you're going to hear, okay? Because you don't know what you're going to hear, and it may surprise you sometimes because we have our own experiences, right?
Yeah.
But you have to ask people, and you have to listen, and you have to really know your folks. And if you do that, and I say ask them, but you have to listen and get to know them, and you don't need to discover everything. But you've got to have the kind of rapport where they know that if they've got something they need or they can come to you and you're going to listen. One of the things that often we talk with managers about today is how do you manage your time? So, we talk about an open door policy, right? But most of us have more than enough to do as it is and can't afford uh, uh, all these interruptions. And so being able to create the right boundaries where you're accessible, but at the same time, you're able to manage your time. So one of the things we often share with folks is, hey, if I would work with my door open, and I would always recommend that for somebody, unless you're in a call and disturbing the workplace. But that way, people can knock on your door, and then they'll typically say, "Hey, you got a minute?" Right? And then the response is key. Look, if it's urgent, I always have a minute for you if it's urgent. But if it's not, I'm in the middle of a project right now. Would you mind scheduling a time on my calendar?
Mm.
And so making sure people know they can come to you if it's urgent, but also saying to them, look, if it's not urgent, could we schedule a time later? And that would give me time to finish the project that I've got to get done. And so there's finding that language and that way to do that in such a way that people feel comfortable that they can bring their needs to you, like we were talking about before, and their issues without it becoming intrusive on your time.
Yeah, I really like the open door policy. That's one of the things that I bring up to our employees. It's like they still do this. They'll ask me, say, "Hey, do you have time to talk about this or whatever?" And I just tell them, "Hey, just look at my calendar. If there's an opening there, book it. I'll be there." And I'll continue to do that until I can't.
Right.
Pretty much everything I do.
No, that's really important. But anyway, I guess that's the thing is when you talk, how do you get those individual needs? It's really by asking them and then creating an environment where people are comfortable coming to you with them. If the first time somebody says something to you, you shut them down, they're not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
They're not coming back.
What are your thoughts on management style as far as like having a harder management versus like a kinder management system and people in place?
Well, I'm not sure. Let me take your question and flip it a little bit if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure kinder and softer is kind of how I would compare contrast management style there.
Sure.
I think there are some principles I would say that you have to create. We'll go back to culture for a moment, okay? And there's some things that I always tell folks that you want to sort of reinforce and create. And so I think it's about more like situational leadership, where sometimes you need to be firm, and sometimes you can be soft. And so let me talk about those points for a moment. So the first thing I think you have to do is create a culture that's focused on the client and your customer. All right. And then secondly, that involves your people. So those are two key things. And then I've got a strong lean background. So I like, as we talked about earlier, respect for standards is key. And eliminating waste. And then finally, visual management. And so the questions I would ask in an environment would be along those lines to sustain and create that sort of culture. When it comes to respect for standards, for example, sometimes if it's safety, it's a hard leadership style. It's like, you're not going, here's how we go. Here's how we're going to do it. This isn't a conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
And in some cases, if in a lot of companies at Michelin anyway, we call cardinal safety rules. And if you violated one of those cardinal safety rules, you most likely would be fired. Okay. Why? Because those cardinal safety rules, if you violate them, can cause death or serious injury.
Yeah.
And our role as leaders is to make sure people go home whole, okay, the way they came to work in the morning. And so that's a pretty hard leadership style. If that's a line in the sand, okay?
Yep.
On the flip side, there are some other sorts of standards where you want respect for standards, but they aren't nearly they're more, you can use them more as coaching
tolerance,
points. Coaching points, not a hard line. And so I think it's a bit situational, to be honest with you. There aren't very many times when, if you were to kind of put a scale out and weigh them, the hard leadership style, safety is a clear one. There aren't too many like that. There's your values and their culture can be maybe a little bit more strong. ethics, how you treat each other. But for the most part, coaching is the soft style, the coaching and the asking questions to have people learn by reflection and thinking is the way to go. If you at the same time though, most companies have a disciplinary process, and you need to have some approach to that, to when folks aren't able to learn or aren't willing to learn, where it escalates, because at some point the other workers expect you to be able to help each other, uh, help hold each other accountable for certain standards. And so it can get progressively harder, depending upon the progression of that and the ability to either pick it up or not. Your workforce expects that from you ultimately as well, for you to raise the expectations and help people hold themselves accountable for the things that they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all these points are very valuable for somebody in like the management type of position or looking to get into management. I've definitely am in a whole new level of management, and one of the harder things for me to manage is the non-executable items that need to be like disciplined. So like when there's a cultural issue versus like an execution issue, that's kind of one of the hardest things. Go ahead.
Yeah, give me an example of what you mean by that.
Let's say, for instance, you have a list of work that needs to be gotten done, right? The list is all getting done, right? But maybe there's like communicational issues, or maybe you could even say like maybe coming into work late, or some more like behavioral things, but all the execution and the work is kind of getting done.
So I'll give you. So let's take the coming into work late, but you're still getting your job done. I think you have to decide what your standards are in your workplace. So for example, in today's world, especially post-COVID now, a lot of folks expect a lot more flexibility with their work schedule, and even whether or not if their job allows, without even having to be present. Of course, in manufacturing, that's a bit hard if you're running a piece of equipment, right? But as an engineer, sometimes you can have more flexibility. And so the question of being tardy versus being objective based, I think we've evolved in our workplace. We've got to ask ourselves, why is it necessary for me to have firm work time? Is there a business reason for that? AKA the machine's got to run. Well, if that's the case, then I can justify that, and I have a standard and I can enforce it. But if there's not a reason for that, why do I have the rule?
Yep.
Okay. And I think we're challenging a lot of those things that previously we didn't challenge. And, it goes back to the why. Is the why clearly related to the business need? If it is, it's going to be easy to explain to the business result, easy to explain and relatively easy to enforce. Okay. But if people are struggling with that, and you see a lot of variation there, then I go back and ask the question, have you explained why it's important to your business?
Yep.
Or is it still needed for your business? Because those are usually signs that one of those two things isn't still relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point, because one thing I notice about myself and my own natures is that when it comes to management, it's the things that I can explain that are the easiest things for me to manage, right? Whenever I have hey, this is causing an issue with this, it's easy to manage it, versus like, like I think sometimes in management you could 101%. I was 101% this individual where I would get very frustrated if somebody's like not doing this thing that they're supposed to do, and I'd be angry internally. And what I noticed as I grew is that mentioning the thing and mentioning kind of like why the thing is disruptive, right, is made it so much easier for me to be able to manage things.
Well, and sometimes the best thing to do when you feel that frustration, a lot of times people want you, like you said, you want to tell someone why they need to be doing it. But sometimes the best way to deal with that is to ask them. So we have this practice or this standard that this is expected to be done. Why is it you're struggling with that?
Mm.
because they may either not understand it, or they may not be able to explain the why themselves. It may be clear to you, but not to them. It goes back to that platinum rule again.
Yeah.
It's listening, is asking them the question and listening to their answer. Because oftentimes I've discovered in my career that my anger was misplaced. In other words, they just they didn't understand the procedure, or even that the standard couldn't be followed, right?
Mm.
So I think there's a lot of time. You've got to take a moment, pause, and ask questions. And if you'll do that, I think you're going to discover the root cause of why they're not following the standard.
Mm.
And that will allow you to better take a more precise action with them to resolve that issue.
Mm. Absolutely. Definitely some valuable points to think on.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, it's always easier to talk about it than it is to do it. Okay. Just for the record. That's always the delicate kind of part of the conversation. As a coach, I can sit down, we can talk to somebody, but then taking the action when you have another person in front of you and finding the words that are comfortable for you and that they're going to respond to, sometimes that takes a little bit of practice. So it is easier to talk about it sometimes than it is to do it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things to point out, like how I was saying, like whenever I can explain something to somebody or talk about the why with somebody, it makes that management so much easier, right? That's that trigger that takes it from extremely difficult to much easier, maybe even simple, right? It's just a normal conversation now, right? And also to kind of touch on that, like I think it's super important to how difficult it can be to manage these things, and that talking about them is much easier, because whenever you say, whatever, they're not doing their job, just fire them, is way different than, hey, sorry, but we have to let you go. You know what I mean? That conversation is a lot harder and completely different.
Well, and when you're a manager of managers, in other words, when you're managing folks that have people working for them, you have to recognize that each individual has their own different behavioral style. So there are some folks that don't like conflict, for example, and will do things to avoid conflict. And so you might have a supervisor who's really good at a lot of things, but might not be comfortable confronting people. Okay. And that's, and so you have to help them learn how to have that conversation within their behavioral style. And again, why is that conversation important? Let's figure out how you can have that in a way where you can manage your discomfort with conflict. So, recognizing that not everybody ticks the same way, so to speak, behaves the same way, is that's also an important element to being a good leader.
Yeah. That, part of what I mentioned about the, hard management versus the soft management, I'm very much more on like the softer side of things. I don't necessarily avoid conflict, but I hate having the hard conversations if they're not worded in a way where it is conversational, or pointing out some type of statistic.
Well, and ironically, if you ask people, I think I would ask you the same question. Most folks like the straight answer, right? And so while you may be hesitant to create conflict, sometimes that's actually the last thing the person wants, is for you to avoid talking to them about the situation. Most folks would much rather hear that they aren't doing it right so they can fix it. No one comes to work in the morning, not no one, almost no one goes to work in the morning thinking, I'm going to mess up today, or I want to mess up today, right? Yeah. And so one of the leadership styles that we want to talk through is, how can I be direct with people? How can I tell them what they need to hear? And do it in a way that they'll receive the information and then be able to act and process it. Okay. So that's a key skill. But if you think about it, most folks normally appreciate that feedback, because that way they can get better, because they want to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. To dive back a little bit more into your career, what made you transition from more of the engineering role to the HR role?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I guess if I think all the way back, when I was at West Point, during the time I was there, we didn't have majors. We just had it. We all were like a Bachelor of Science and Engineering degree, but we could take certain electives. And I took most of my electives in psychology. So I've always enjoyed the people side of things. I chose to work in the infantry, not because I enjoyed carrying a rifle, but because it was about people. And so I've always sort of had that bias towards the people side of the business. And so, prior to taking on the actual recruiting role, even in manufacturing, I was involved with the deployment of our best practices, manufacturing best practices, with a focus on helping people learn how to do them. And so it was kind of a training and development role, but from the manufacturing side. So for me, that's always been a passion of mine, something I've enjoyed doing. And, it's led to me being a coach now as well. So it's just, I think it's been something I've always liked and enjoyed doing. And at the end of the day, and this manufacturing is people business. It certainly there's equipment it's running, but at least until we get to a lights out factory, it's about the people.
Yeah.
And so that's always been a key part of it, and something I've really enjoyed. And so that's why I pursued moving into HR.
Gotcha. So was it a pretty deliberate decision to shift, or did things kind of just align for you to go that direction?
So I'm going to say yes. And what I mean by that. So, the way you get a role with a company is kind of three things have to line up. One, you've got to be interested in something. Two, there has to be a need. And then three, you got to say yes, So I'd always had a sort of my eye on certain HR activities. And, depending upon where I was in my career in terms of the current job and whether we usually stayed in our roles 3 to 5 years. So the timing. And then secondly, there was an opening that matched my skills, and then we made the match. So that's how that sort of happened. So it was kind of both. It was both the need the company had for what I could offer for that role and my interest in that role.
Gotcha. What was the actual title of that position?
Yeah. So my first, so as I mentioned, and we're kind of talking about years now, in 2005, I had the opportunity to move in this training and development role, working in helping to deploy our manufacturing best practices. And, that was more of a training and development role. It took advantage of my experience in manufacturing and my interest in training and development people, and brought them together. Following that role, that's when I became the director of corporate recruiting. And what was a good match there for me is recruiting is very much an operational activity. Okay. And I took on that role in 2010. And if you remember, in 2008, we had a big downturn in the economy, and the company was still coming back from that time. We had a lot of requisitions to fill, and we had to be very operationally focused. And so even though I had an HR experience, now my operational background, combined that together, made me a good match for the recruiting role. And then as I matured in HR, I retired I was the competency manager for the progress profession. And in that role, I was responsible for the training and development of the industrial engineers and progress engineers, and helping to train the line managers and how to support them, and also lead continuous improvement. I had responsibility for the job design for the progress engineers, industrial engineers, so they would stay with the company, enjoy their work, and finally, that we were contributing to the results of the business. So most of my HR roles were a strong combination of both business and people.
Gotcha.
And that's really what I enjoyed, both, is that combination. And that's why I like doing what I do now as a business coach and executive coach, is it really combines both elements again, the people side and the business side.
Yeah. I'm kind of a good point to segue. Your transition from the 9-to-5 job to business consulting, what made you make that transition?
Well, I'm going to pick at your word for a moment, because it's coaching, not consulting. Okay.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
No, and there's a difference. And the difference is, as
there
a
is
coach,
a difference, yeah.
I want to ask the questions and help the person develop the competence to manage their own situations. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes a consultant will bring a solution and then, move on to the next problem.
Yeah.
No, I just found in my career, Michelin was great. 35 years. I didn't have to retire. But I reached the point in my career where I wanted a little more flexibility in what I was able to do. I've got 3 grandchildren now. I want to be able to spend time with them. And I can do this as long as I want, as much as I want.
Right.
And it just made a lot of sense that I could take the experience I had, what I learned, and now enjoy that and work for myself instead of for a big company and help others. Today, one of the things I like to do is work with younger professionals who are not sure about their career and help them think about where they're going and develop their own plans. The thing about that I enjoy most, a lot of times they'll ask me, and I'm in a great position to be able to do this. What do I owe you? And for me, the answer is you don't owe me anything. 20 years from now, when you're successful, pay it forward, help someone else. And I think that's something we can do. And I'm fortunate because I've retired and have retirement and have.
This episode of the Manufacturing Come Up is sponsored by Elite Automation.
Elite Automation is a systems integrator specializing in robotic weld cell applications, and especially the design and manufacturing of the weld fixture.
If you have any robotic weld cell needs, you can reach us at rfq@eliteautomationusa.com.
The capability to do it,
yeah, coaching that I can help others. One of the side things I also enjoy doing is helping those folks who are transitioning from the military to civilian life in the same way. So these are some important things for me.
Are you kind of doing some of those things as just like a give back, or those like people you're taking on as clients?
Yeah, as a give back, and or clients. It's it really mostly depending upon the person's situation, give back, and then for others it's a client depending upon where they are in terms of their business or if they are in a business already.
Gotcha. A lot of those individuals on the give back side of things, are they entrepreneurs, or are they somebody just looking into getting into a career?
It kind of depends where I've met them. Okay. Normally,
Gotcha.
A lot of times they're entrepreneurs who are looking for, it's harder on the entrepreneur side because it's not where my expertise lies. I'm not, I worked in a large company, so I'm better off working with folks who already are as business leaders in an established business. So I'm usually dealing with folks either who are of an established business, of which they normally are paid clients at that point, or individuals who aren't sure about their career. And with my recruiting experience, I'm able to help them, and that's oftentimes pro bono. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think especially for those who are maybe earlier in their career, that because at some level, right? If you're gonna get a coach, you make that decision to get a coach. But I think a lot of people may ask themselves, like, when is the right time for me to get a coach?
Good question. So I'm on a routine. So if we talk about coaching, I think the best analogy is this. So whether let's talk about sports for a moment. If you play golf or tennis or any sport, I mean, through your entire sporting life, you have coaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're just starting out as a novice, you need a coach, or whether you are at the top of your game, an Olympic athlete, you have a coach.
Right.
And so I think the answer to your question is any time is the right time to have a coach, honestly, because you can always, why a coach? There are things you don't always see in yourself. Mm-hmm. There are perspectives you're looking for. There are skills you're trying to develop where you can't do that on your own. So having somebody else to help you can be very, very valuable to you. So it really any time is the right time, to be honest with you, depending upon what your goals are. Yeah. I typically, as an executive coach, if I'm working with somebody in an organization, it's usually one of two scenarios. Either they're struggling with their team and they're not getting the best performance from their team and they need to accelerate that performance, or they're doing quite well there and they're preparing for the next role.
Mm.
So it's usually one of those two scenarios if it's from a personal coaching perspective. And if it's from a business coaching perspective, it's about improving your profitability. Usually a business leader has a challenge in one of four areas if they need a coach. One is time. I'm working 8 hours a week and I can't get to Johnny's soccer game, or I can't get to my wife was wondering when we're going to go out on a date. So time.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make more time. You have to use your time more effectively. Team. I know my team is competent, but we're not getting good results. Or, I hired Steve 2 years ago and I know he's got the competences, but we don't get along, so team. Money. I've been working hard for 2 years and our revenue's not grown, or I never seem to have enough cash to get through the month. And then finally, strategy or future. A lot of small business owners and mid-sized business owners are so focused on today that they don't think about 3 or 5 years from now or beyond. And so putting together strategies, going back to our conversation around starting with the why, purpose, values, vision, mission, strategy, having that put in place so that you can actually drive the future of your business rather than reacting to it. So usually a business leader is going to have a coach and working with them in one of those four areas.
Gotcha. Do you have a particular type of client that you, or particular thing that you like to coach?
Well, I prefer, my expertise is in manufacturing. So I look for manufacturers, and I actually work today with many software providers who support manufacturers as well. So those are really my ideal clients. Gotcha.
And is there any particular aspect within the business that's kind of your favorite, or?
No, really, as a focal point coach, really, I'm able to work with all aspects of the business. So,
gotcha.
That's one of the strengths of the focal point brand.
Gotcha. Awesome. Do you have any last valuable points that you'd like to add back to the community?
Well, I think I want to talk about manufacturing just for a moment. We've talked about leading and that kind of thing, but manufacturing is a wonderful career. I enjoyed my time in manufacturing tremendously. As we move into the future, we need to continue to develop our manufacturing environments to make them attractive so that we attract great talent. And really, manufacturing is the heartbeat, I believe, of our economy. And so we've got to continue to grow it, refine it, and make it strong for the future. So if you're wondering, should I go into manufacturing? I would say yes. You'll learn a lot. A lot of things we talked about today should be part of your environment.
Yep.
And then secondly, as leaders in manufacturing, if you're listening, make sure you're creating the right cultures and environment to attract those folks to your workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, I obviously believe that manufacturing is a great career. I lean slightly towards the automation robotics side of things, but I think manufacturing as a whole is it opens up so many opportunities that so many people didn't even think about as a career path, and it's just been so fruitful to people. There's so many good jobs in this career field in manufacturing.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us today, Mike. Is there any particular area? I know you mentioned in the beginning of this episode. Where can people find you at again?
Yeah. So if you're a share to the Industry 4.0 Club, me personally, please check me out on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. And if you'd like to talk more about coaching, please reach out. I'm happy to spend a little bit of time seeing if there's an opportunity for us to work together, or, I don't mind spending 30 minutes getting to know you and broadening my network as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Malachi. Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Take care.